That's where me and Joel, we kind of get along in that world. I want to make something very perfectly clear before we get into Joel Salatin. I am punching above my weight class by a lot, and I will be the first person to admit this. So if you don't agree with me, I get it. If you're mad at me, I get it. If you think I'm 100% correct, you might want to like second check yourself. But regardless, just keep that in mind. So Joel Salatin, the reason why he came on my radar, the reason why I'm doing this video is because so many of the geek crew and people in my personal life have texted me, emailed me, one person called me, DM'd me asking for my input on Joel Salatin and what my thoughts were in regards to him getting appointed by Trump. And I'm gonna kind of talk about that here in a little bit. But first off, the fact that so many of you even remotely respect what my opinion on Joel Salatin is, I'm sorry. I'm sorry we're this good of friends. You probably want to double check your life choices. Regardless, I love you. That's all that matters. Joel Salatin. The first article I was sent was Joel Salatin is appointed by Trump. I dug into it a little bit. Turns out Joel Salatin wasn't appointed by Trump necessarily. Trump, I don't even know if Trump knows who he is, but who he was appointed by was Thomas Massey from Kentucky. And this gentleman appointed him to be the advisor to the secretary to the USDA. What that means, I don't know. I'm not American. Americans, what does that mean? Please comment down below. Geek crew members that are American, please comment down below. No idea what that means. However, it has caused a lot of drama because this guy's a little bit controversial. The first time I heard of him, I thought he was kind of a nobody. And the way I heard about him was actually through Nate, Canadian prepper. You guys know I've done several videos with him, most of which is just me torturing him. However, he had texted me way back about Joel Salatin and how he was doing a podcast with him. I thought nothing of it. I was like, whatever, I don't know who this guy is, cool. Nate then did the podcast or the interview and then sent me the link to said interview and was like, check this out, let me know what you think. Well, Nate's probably watching this, but let's just say Nate was on one side and I was on the other. And the discourse of text messages were polarizing, to say the least. I am going to give you a view where I'm not going to interject my thoughts and feelings on Joel Salatin, his concepts, etc. and so forth. I'm gonna try to stay pretty darn neutral in this matter. However, when you go to Google research this gentleman and what society thinks of him. I've been watching a lot of Joel Salatin videos since I filmed this about a week or 2 weeks ago, and the guy's incredibly self-aware and he's funny, so I do appreciate that about him. Very lighthearted dude, but incredibly self-aware, which is hilarious to me because if you can poke fun at yourself, then you're a pretty good person, just on a personable level anyways. So that part I truly do enjoy. Joel Salatin is described by most farmers on the green sign as a lunatic. Just hold on, that's not actually disrespectful when you hear in a little bit what he says about himself, but on the world of meat production, chickens, cows, you name it, he is considered a bioterrorist. He himself self-describes as, and I don't want to mess up his own words, so let me just give them to you here. He is a Christian, libertarian, environmentalist, capitalistic, lunatic farmer. He self-describes as a lunatic. So, as you can see, the guy's a little bit polarizing. He polarizes himself. There are people who absolutely love and adore, and there are people who absolutely despise. I don't know what side's right. His overall approach to this, based on what I've read and what he said himself, is on current events, philosophy. There might be some science in there. He doesn't really point to anything. However, some of the things and the concepts he speaks about definitely are based in some logic. I don't think he puts religion into it, but philosophy is like the one where I'm kind of like, okay, that's sort of frou-frou to me. He also uses current events, which again is frou-frou to me. He sets his premise for what he does is based on a vibe. You have to understand, regardless of political side, I have a very like scientific, analytical mind. Joel, I've also found out, is a writer, meaning he's a creative mind, not an analytical mind. So him and me think very differently when we just look at everyday life. That's probably why I can't quite understand his methodology. Does not mean it's wrong. Does not mean it's wrong. It just means it's different, and it's something that I just don't jive with. It is what it is. So for me to go on vibes, it's not my thing. However, there are people who do it, and there are people who are incredibly successful at doing it. So I don't discredit him in any way for using those methods or those concepts to do what he does. I'm just saying, for me, it's really hard for me to grasp onto that. I was researching on Joel Salatin. I did stumble across a podcast with Joe Rogan, and I did watch this podcast, and there was a portion of the podcast in which Joel Salatin was talking about the idea of a local food source. Now, this is something that I think you guys have obviously heard me speak about. I'm pretty passionate about it happening because I do think probably the solution to food deserts, I do think the solution to just even the outputs of carbon dioxide, the environmental impacts, all of it can be not maybe cured, but definitely curbed by a local food supply. So one thing he does speak about is having a garden or a large local area that produces all its own meat, produces all its own fruits and vegetables, all that sort of stuff. That is one thing where I do agree. I think it'd be a cool concept to explore for sure. That's where me and Joel, we kind of get along in that world. Because Joel is so polarizing, and because you either love him or you hate him, I'm not going to comment on Joel Salatin as a person. What I am going to comment on and kind of use where I think I'm not punching so far out of my league is the concept or the ideas of regenerative farming, and whether or not a government-run program or just the concept in general could sustain planet Earth, because it is a totally different world compared to organic, even organic and conventional, obviously, farming. So that's what I want to discuss more so here today. Not to mention the amount of news articles on this guy from both CNN, Fox, all these different people have different articles on him. So I can't even tell you where the middle ground is, because one is totally on one side, the other's on totally on the other side. So I don't even feel comfortable speaking about Joel Salatin as a person, because I have no sniff as to what this guy's like. So that's just the other part too. I just not comfortable with it. I wouldn't want someone to do it to me, so I'm not going to do it to Joel. So regenerative farming, this is a new concept. By new concept, I mean it is newly fleshed out and defined. Not new in the sense that it's never been used before. It actually is the original way of farming. That aside, the concept, the map that is now regenerative farming is newly written. I know when I was in university, it was not a thing, particularly in the beginning portion of my world of university. It wasn't a thing. No one really thought about this. However, now when I go to trade shows, because I do go to trade shows quite often with my day job for the world of agriculture, there are at least one or two companies that specifically work in the world of regenerative farming, meaning it's a business at this point. Now, it's a business in the sense that there are companies that can help you with the roadmap and the products and the tactics that you need to be able to regenerative farm, all the way to there are producers who ultimately are also businesses. No matter how big or small they are, that are utilizing this technique and are very passionate about utilizing this technique. Furthermore, other than it being mainstream, other than it being now commercial, there's the science side. And the science side also is starting to get on board. There are, for example, the Rodell Institute out of Pennsylvania. There's a Gladys Zanatti, she's a scientist over there, and she's doing a side-by-side comparison of organic, conventional, and then regenerative farming. And she's been doing it since 2016. And this is a concept where she intends to run it indefinitely to observe the changes in yields, environment, etc., and so forth between the three. So it is becoming pretty mainstream, meaning there's more money involved with regenerative farming, technology, research, etc., and so forth, which may be a good thing at the end of the day. Okay, so to conceptualize regen, we have to look at the other two options. So option number one is conventional. Conventional is referencing the ability to put in high input, the ability to till, the ability to use pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, you name it. It is your classic form of farming. And this is where Nate and me had butt heads, because Joel came on and he kind of had said on that interview in particular how damaging tillage is and how evil farmers are and blah, 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 blah.
An inch of topsoil left isn't very much.
That's where Ashley got a little bit defensive, if we're being totally honest. There are different forms of conventional farming. I want to say that straight up. There's the American form of conventional farming, which I love Americans. A majority of the people who watch this channel actually are American. Sorry, Canadians, but it's true. It can be the more destructive form of farming. Absolutely. Arguably the second most destructive form of farming. The most destructive form of farming would probably be in South America, particularly the rainforest space. That's the American side. There is middle ground. Middle ground, I think you could argue, is Canada as a great example of this. So we incentivize, we actually subsidize even the idea of conventional farming where no-till, low-till is the norm. To the point that I'll put the stats up from Government of Canada, but a majority of farmers are in this world, and it's made a big difference for them in regards to several different aspects of farming, particularly in the green world. Now, we even have specialized equipment. We have entire industries like John Deere, Case, Salford, like there's so many different companies out there at this point that make no-till, low-till equipment because of what Canada chose to do in regards to this incentive. So there's the middle ground. Now I guess maybe you could say the extreme end would be probably more so in the European range. That is the other. That's maybe you can consider that the extreme of conventional farming, but regardless, that is a majority of where our food comes from. That is a majority of what you find in the grocery store that doesn't have the organic label on it. Okay, so that's conventional. Those are viewed as the bad guys. Now, the next step is actually organic. Okay, so the world of organic. This one, most majority of folks would consider to be good. They've been convinced it's good for their health, for the environment, etc., and so forth. I could do a whole video on organic farming. Not the best, not the best. Let's just say she's not all rainbows and sunshine. Probably the big one that disturbs me the most. I could literally do a buttload of these. I could do a whole video on this, but the one that disturbs me the most is tillage. Tillage is very, very common in the world of organic agriculture, and this is out of necessity. Necessity meaning they need it to be able to control weeds in particular. So it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Is there benefits? Absolutely. I'm not going to take away from that. There are benefits when compared to conventional, but there's also its downfalls. Now, Regen is like the new form of organic, and it is being touted as problem-free, if you will. Now, regenerative agriculture, I think you could probably from my knowledge, you could break down into kind of three main groups. Now, number one is the concept of no-till. They are big on no-till. They tout no-till, and I believe there are some aspects of this where you could say, yes, this is a no-till environment. But obviously, when you're planting anything, there is going to be tillage. You need to break the surface. And I haven't seen any documents, videos, in-person accounts of them being able to somehow get the seed in the ground without disturbing the soil, like the soil surface. This is for annual crops, wheats, barleys, legumes, potatoes, all of it. Like, you're gonna have to disturb the ground. So that, by definition, is considered low till. Now, low till is wonderful. It's wonderful, but let's not say it's no-till, because it's not true. So needless to say, the world of no-till and regen, it falls into the same category as organic or conventional. The only difference, I think you could probably argue, kind of lands in different forms of conventional versus regen, or organic, or even other forms of conventional. So there is a form of conventional where you harrow. And the harrowing at times involves removing a bulk of the biomass. And the reason for removing the bulk of the biomass, the stubble, is because it tends to clog up machines and machinery. Now, when this machinery is going across the soil surface, in a low-till environment, meaning it's just breaking the surface enough to put the seed in, it gets wrapped around what we call the openers, the knives. These knives, these openers, when they get too much junk on them, don't perform well. They clog, they get very heavy, they pick up a whole bunch of junk, etc. and so forth. So oftentimes, people that have too much trash will harrow, remove, put it off to the side. This, in regen, they leave it behind. So I think you could argue that's beneficial, but when I say they leave it behind, I mean there are a number of conventional farmers and organic farmers that do the same. So I'm not sure that that's so much of a comparative as like good or bad. One thing I will say about Joel, and this is actually probably my biggest beef with him, is he makes it seem like agriculture conventionally is just ripping that land up, which is a hugely misguided comment for sure. Are there people out there that absolutely ransack it? Absolutely, 100%. I've seen it. I drove by it. I drove the US from Montana all the way to Nevada and back up the West Coast. Yes, there's lots of it, particularly in America. But to blanket term conventional that way is not fair. To blanket term organic that way is not fair. So I think regen in the regards to no-till actually is probably pretty equal across the board. So the next one is grazing. Now grazing, again, is one of those things where there are people across organic, conventional, and regen that utilize this. And I will give Joel Salatin this, it isn't the norm for particularly conventional farmers to do the grazing method. However, it's slowly becoming more prevalent. I have seen it. So the idea here is that you would graze your animals on the land periodically. Where regen and conventional organic are different in regards to grazing is that conventional and organic, when grazing, is typically done after everything is harvested. So once your seeds have been pulled out of the crop, you have debris left over. So rather than harrowing, the idea is to put livestock on it. And the livestock will go in, kind of eat up the excess, fertilize naturally, and then, Bob's your uncle type thing. So there's that world. Regenerative agriculture while you could do that, you could go that route, you also may see at times a field that is summer followed, meaning nothing's grown on it, but we're not like necessarily spraying it or doing anything crazy with it. However, whatever is turning up or whatever is growing, we're moving livestock onto that land, they're grazing on it, and then we're moving it off. This is where Regen, I think, actually does separate itself hugely from organic and conventional. The grazing takes place at a very specific point in the plant's growth. And the idea, I'm doing this because it's like a graph and it's probably gonna be backwards because I never know which way to put my hands because apparently anyways. Say you have a chart. And I'll flip the screen to make sure it's the right direction in this case. So say you have a chart. The idea of when to harvest is like dead center in the middle. You don't want to harvest too soon. If you harvest too soon, you're going to have overgrazing. If you have overgrazing, you have desertification, you have loss of topsoil, loss of moisture, soil structure, etc. and so forth. The plants can't recover if you graze too soon. The opposite end of that is grazing too late. And this is where conventional and organic would land. They go in, they send the animals in after everything is done or at the tail end. And the idea here is it's not as beneficial. The reason why it's not as beneficial is because it's not causing the plants to continue to capture carbon. Regen wins in this department because they're grazing at a timed space where the plant is still actively growing and the removal of biomass for that plant is not substantial enough to harm it and stop it from growing. It's enough that it actually invigorates, encourages more growth, which in turn results in more carbon capture. So Regen wins when it comes to grazing over the opposite sides of this. Now the question is, do I agree with that? Not that you care. Yes, I think that that is legitimate. I do think it's a step above what organic and conventional is doing. I do think the secret is somewhere in the middle. It's a mix between conventional, regular, and then obviously this kind of grazing method. I've been watching this form of agriculture, the grazing of fields, for a little while now, probably about 5-ish years, and I'm intrigued by it, and I'm convinced that it could change things drastically for conventional farmers in particular, because that's more of my expertise, if you will. So yeah, that is where Regen definitely has a step up. Now, grazing, livestock, Joel Salatin. This is where he's considered a bioterrorist because he doesn't believe in vaccinations from what my understanding is. And he doesn't believe, I don't know about human. Well, actually, no, I did watch something where I definitely heard his thoughts on the human portion of it, but let's just stick to the animal side. So animal side of things, he doesn't believe in vaccines, which the organic world also, they typically don't use antibiotics or anything like that too. So I guess you could lump these two together. When you're doing intensive agriculture, when we're talking feedlots, high densities of animals, typically speaking, pretty darn locked down. Anyone who's toured a feedlot, a chicken barn, a hog barn, you know this. You have to fill out forms saying you haven't been in contact with any other birds before. You need clearance to get into like a dairy farm, for example. You have to sanitize your boots. You usually have to wear suits. You have to have your hair up and like net. They're very cautious because there's such a high density of animals that if a disease did break out, it would very, very quickly wipe out the entire barn. So they are particular when it comes to vaccinations, and Joel Salatin doesn't believe in that. Now, I think you could maybe argue that that makes sense because if you're grazing these animals, they're in an open field, they're really spread out, they're not overpopulated, like you're not highly, because you have no interest in overgrazing, because that would actually be a detriment to your regenerative farming practice. You could argue that it makes sense. It doesn't really matter, but that is where he kind of butts heads with the conventional world, if you will. And another thing too about Joel, another thing I do respect about him is he has said repeatedly that he doesn't think that, for example, McDonald's is evil. He believes that they're just misinformed in regards to like food production. So I mean, that's like, I enjoy, from a personal level, I respect people who don't blanket say evil, good, or absolutely not, absolutely yes. I like people who are willing to wander between, I guess, the spectrums. And it seems like Joel Salatin is willing to do that when it comes to the world of big agriculture. So one thing I do respect, absolutely. Okay, the next one is agroforestry. Now this, I haven't watched enough of Joel Salatin to say that he's into it. What I will say is if we were to go this route, we would definitely need to capitalize on the world of local no food desert worlds, because the idea of putting different forms of food plants in a space at all different levels. So for example, what I did at Nate's place, where we build a literal food forest, we have like our bottom of the ground, our soil stabilizers, we have kind of our mid ground, we have our vines, we have our really tall trees. It is a grouping of plants, and agriculture currently, organic or conventionally, even regenerative in some cases, requires monocrops. And technology is developing so that we don't have to go the monocrop route, and we can actually like separate the seed sizes based on the sizes of the seeds and still get great bang for your buck, I guess, at the elevator. And the idea is we had to go in the opposite spectrum. So we'd have to put like peas with canola, for example. So two very different sized seeds together in the same field. We're developing technology that allows us to do that. But currently the norm, the majority, is monocropping. And monocropping is not regenerative. That is not a regenerative concept. Currently, I think it happens quite often, but it is something that in its purity wouldn't take place. And the idea that we would have such drastically different crops in the same landmass within, 5 feet of each other, does it increase biodiversity? Yes. The rhizosphere naturally, if it has different plants, is sending out different signals, which signals to different microbes, you name it. Yes. Is it more biodiverse underground? Absolutely. Is it more biodiverse above ground? 100%. You're going to get different pollinators. You're going to get different herbivores. You're going to get literally all of it's going to be different above ground even. The problem lies in actually harvesting this stuff. There is no equipment, and I don't think there's ever going to be equipment out there that's going to allow you to harvest 5 different crops. Some are seeds, some are like literal physical fruits like apples and grapes. That's just not going to happen. So for that portion of regenerative farming to feed the world, if you will, we would need people to hand pick this, and it would have to be local because, yeah, maybe it could be not local. I just don't see a world in which it couldn't. And maybe I'm just narrow-minded. It's very possible. So as you can see, the world of regenerative farming, the world of Joel Salatin, the world of what he probably is going to bring to the USDA for ideas, tips and tricks, if you will, is Regen. Now, Regen, in its base form, Joel Salatin removed, is the idea of the maximum volume of carbon capture while simultaneously encouraging soil biodiversity, and in turn results in more biodiversity above ground. I think that kind of encompasses, it's an encompassing definition for regenerative agriculture. Is it more sustainable? I think you could argue yes. The only problem I see with Joel Salatin and regenerative agriculture is the fact that I don't know how you would feed the world on this. I don't know how you would feed even a country on this. So the traditional way of farming, and the reason why, how am I going to word? So the reason why traditional farming is so successful, no, let's reword this totally differently. The reason why our population exploded, baby boomer onward, is because, I think you could probably argue this pretty easily, the invention of conventional agriculture. So conventional agriculture started about 60-ish years ago. It was around World War II. And it was developed because there was massive inputs being placed in the soil in regards to fertilizer. We were developing pesticides, horrific ways in which we figured out how to even make this stuff, but regardless, we figured out pesticides. And these two factors allowed us to obtain higher yields. Now, these higher yields resulted in more food. The availability to more food for less money resulted in larger populations because people were more secure in having more children. And you can see kind of how this amplified and happened. Now, regenerative agriculture, and Joel Salatin, if he was to just walk in the White House and Trump was like, make the rules for agriculture, change it all today, I don't think it would work. And I think that most regenerative agriculture enthusiasts would probably agree to this because it is such a drastic change. It is like a flip of a switch type situation. Now, do I think that if you removed food deserts, if you demoed some buildings and you put an agricultural center everywhere in every kind of neighborhood, is it possible? Yes, I actually do think it's possible. I think it's possible to grow a population on that, but it would definitely have to be local. I think that if you were to just flip a switch today, go from conventional, organic, conventional to regenerative agriculture, I think a lot of people would starve. It bluntly, very bluntly, I think that's exactly what would happen. There is an incredible amount of human intelligence that has to go into this because you have to know when to graze the animals. You have to know plant life cycles. You have to be able to identify disease and pests. And that's one thing that regenerative agriculture, from what I've seen, doesn't talk about is like pest prevention or how to actually eliminate pests once they've established. In my mind, I'm thinking to myself, well, you're capitalizing on microbes and an ecosystem to be able to fight these things, which I understand that. I get why we would think that there's bad guys and there's good guys, and if we colonize or help these good guys expand more, they'll be able to outweigh the bad guys. I get the concept. But even on an ecological front, I haven't seen it always play out perfectly. So for example, the boreal forest, PA, Saskatchewan, PA upwards has an issue. It's a fungal issue. It's called mistletoe. Mistletoe is just devastating this forest. And this is a native, natural fungus. This is not introduced. This is just something that happens to boreal forests. The only way it's eliminated is via forest fires. Okay, so these are natural ecosystems that are very abundant in the Good Guys because that is all that grows there. It is literally the personification of regenerative agriculture, but no food source. This is taking over. It is destroying this poor forest. And there's no fix to it unless you were to apply fungicide, which they won't do because it's a natural ecosystem. There's a national park just right there. So your controlled burns, your forest fires is the only win. My question, I guess, to the regenerative agriculture world, my question to Joel Salatin is like, what would you do in that situation? And maybe I'm ignorant. Would you, I guess, is that land just useless now and you like come back to it later? And I don't mean that in a condescending way. Would you just like kind of let that disease or that fungus or that issue run its course and kind of run its way across the landscape and then you would just come back later? I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is. And that's kind of the answer that I've given everyone who's DM'd me, emailed me, texted me, called me, weirdo that called me, about this Joel Salatin situation. My answer always, bottom line, is Joel Salatin he's a great figurehead for the world of regenerative agriculture. I think he does a great job at advocating for it. I think he does a great job of ignoring the people who can be very nasty towards him, which is a really difficult thing in the world of social media and today. And he just continues onward. So I think Joel Salatin has that going for him. He's a great figurehead for regenerative agriculture. And because of that, I think he definitely could be kind of a word or a whisper in the ear of the USDA and some ideas or some concepts we could bring forward to increase carbon sequestration, to increase soil microbiology, to increase above ground biology. Fine. But I think if you gave that group, Joel Salatin aside, if you gave the regenerative agriculture group the keys to the USDA, the keys to agriculture, and they were allowed to just say, hard stop right now, conventional to regen, I think a lot of people would starve. Because I just don't see a world, given our infrastructure currently, where we would survive and thrive, for lack of a better term. Now, if you're new to this channel or to just gardening in general, I use a version of organic and conventional, I guess, it's more regenerative and conventional gardening. And if you want to start a garden and begin to integrate a local food supply that is healthier for you, your family, surrounding area, the ecosystem, etc., you're going to want to check out this playlist right there. And that is what Google says you've been looking for. So check that out. Anyways, I'll talk to you guys next time.